Hello and a very warm welcome. This is Learning Horizons from Think Skills. I am Gail Watson and I'm delighted to welcome today Michael Osborne from Accessible Me in this very first sessions. These Learning Horizons are designed to explore what is possible today, combining learning technologies and neuroscience and all we know about learning to actually create impact and learning transfer in the learning experience that we create. It is a difficult topic because we are covering so many different areas, and it is particularly challenging for many of us designing for virtual and hybrid experiences, as for many learners or for many buyers of learning experience, we are still pigeonholed into delivering lectures online. So let's challenge this. And this is why today I'm very excited to welcome Michael. And we are going to talk about accessibility. It is key in virtual and hybrid learning because initially, and it talks to me as well, when I started Think Skills, we didn't want Think Skills to because it was accessible, but it was accessible in my mind to people who didn't want to travel, couldn't travel to go to trainings, because training at the time was in big cities, London, Paris, Brussels, and you would go for minimum a day, sometimes two, sometimes a whole week. And that accessibility was just giving an opportunity for those who couldn't travel, but accessibility is a lot more than this. And this is why I'm so happy to have Michael with us today. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself and your journey into accessibility?
Sure. So greetings, everyone. My name is Michael Osborne, and I am the founder and CEO of a company called Accessible Me Limited. Accessible Me was founded to make all of the world's content and all the world's spaces accessible to people with disabilities. So, Gail, you mentioned making can the venue be accessible to someone? Can we get there through distance? I'm looking at what barriers might get in the way in the process, right from the sign up and registration of the event to the running of the event and the eventual evaluation of the event as well. So that might take into consideration people with cognitive disabilities. So we hear a lot around neurodivergence at the moment, and people with different kind of disabilities such as autism, dyslexia. But we also cover people who are blind and maybe have low vision, people who might be deaf or similar on the hearing front, people with mobility conditions, and also speech input as well. So you and I having a conversation like this, can somebody who maybe has a speech impediment, can they still engage in a conversation and a webinar? So we're all around removing barriers to be able to engage with content, because if you can remove those, we help people in the workplace. We help give people those opportunities in the workplace, just as anyone else would have if they want to apply to a new role or apply to a leadership position and scale up in their business. We want to make sure that the training, all the steps to help them on that ladder, are there for them, and that everyone can succeed.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael, to actually explain that there is a lot more to accessibility than just, getting to the training. Do we know how many people in the workplace? Do we have a rough idea about how many people are concerned? I mean, what percentage
Sure.
of the workforce?
So I don't know specifics on the workplace, but the World Health Organization, their guidelines suggest that anywhere from say 15 to 25% of the world's population experience some kind of disability, and they think that that is a conservative estimate because actually there is a fear of discrimination in the workplace. If I disclose that I have a disability, I might not be considered for the job, all the way through to kind of getting promotions and things in the jobs. But even if you take those conservative numbers, those conservative estimates, you're still potentially talking about excluding up to 1 billion people, from you learning in some way, and that's keeping in mind as well that disabilities can be intersectional. So, because for example, I have autism. I also have ADHD, depression, anxiety, Tourette's, and so I have multiple conditions, and many people that do. So take for example, Tourette's, as I've just mentioned. A lot of people have things like OCD, autism, and related things. It doesn't guarantee that they do, but these things are often intersectional. Now, when it comes to the workplace, sadly, as with kind of uh, black and minority ethnicities or kind of women in certain roles, there is a gap in representation in employment. So statistically, if you have a disability, you are less likely to be in the employed than someone who doesn't have a disability. That is something I'm actively looking to change and working with people and charities and organizations who are also joining that um, fantastic initiative. But yeah, in terms of those scenarios. I think when you look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace, it's all good having these strategies to broaden the diversity. But if you don't have the structures in place, like the proper onboarding, if your onboarding isn't accessible, if development opportunities aren't fair or accessible, you're not going to have that sense of belonging to keep people. So, I think even if we have all these initiatives to get people into the business, we have to make sure the training is accessible to them to keep them there. And that goes from whether your staff are from have parents who didn't go to university or are from less affluent from backgrounds. It might be geography based, you might not have the internet structure. And so I do think for me, accessibility is part of a wider D&I umbrella, but it's a huge piece. And I'm not a diversity and inclusion expert, I'm an expert in this one area of disability, which is somewhere I can really help people.
That is wonderful. And we can't really, and we're at a time in general in the world of talent that we are
Yes,
trying to access more talent, and we cannot do the economy of leaving people behind because the training we produce or the onboarding we create doesn't allow new team members or existing team members to progress through their careers and acquire the skills and knowledge they need to actually do their jobs properly. So that is definitely something we need to keep in mind. There is those who are vocal about the accessibility
yes.
issues, but there are also those who hide them. And it is, I think, good practice for all of us in the learning world to make sure that everything we do is accessible to all. And this is why we are now, I think, and thank you very much, Michael, to doing this for Think Skills. We are going to go through our slides, Think Skills slides, and we are going to see what we can do to make them more accessible. Now, we've been working in virtual training of, for 10 years. I think Skills been created actually 10 years ago in October. So we're just short of it. And having slides that are easily readable, that are easy to digest for, I would say, a standard learner was also something at the forefront of my mind. But even with this baseline, there is definitely room for improvement, and I'm very grateful to you, Michael, to actually have taken the time to review and talk us through your thought process, who it is important for, how does it work, and generally the bigger pictures behind inclusive design.
Absolute pleasure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen and we will talk through it. So hopefully, Gail, in a moment you will see that and you can let me know. So is that showing on your screen?
It does. Thank you.
Sure. So let's talk accessibility in the slide deck. And one of the things I wanted to say first and foremost is actually a real kudos to Sync Skills, because as I was working through the deck, there's a lot of things that are already done, to actually find fault with it in any places was somewhat a challenge sometimes. But starting on the title slide, so I'm not going to talk through the content of the deck specifically and more on the design. We've got this lovely title. We have the large font for the 10 proven techniques to maximize engagement. But then you specify that we're looking at in virtual and hybrid training. And there is what I would pick up kind of quite quickly is that there's a contrast issue there. We have the light grey text on the white background, which may be difficult for people who have low vision to see, particularly if you think in the modern day, we're not always joining from laptops and things. You might be joining from your mobile phone, and when you're cramping this down, and it's just a small font, these contrast issues come up more and more so. Also, when you introduce yourself, obviously your name, you have the acronyms COLF, and whilst unless you're explaining that when you're doing your introduction, it is or anything that has acronyms on the screen that aren't necessarily an industry standard could cause confusion. So if it's serving a purpose to have it there, to show your accreditations, it's fantastic. But I would say make sure you're explaining it. With the next one, we have your views, and we have the four dots to the right. This is a small thing, and I'm really nitpicking there, but if we can clean up extra punctuation for readability, there's I think three dots is fairly standard. So and my mother-in-law uses that quite a lot, So there's small things in the words we use, not just the design. Now skimming through as well, we have engagement. We are introducing a new section, here. And what I would suggest is to think about our focus on people and not just technology. So one of the things that's lovely on this slide is we have people on the screen, people on the laptop. Um, and if we make the section titles clear and more focused on people-centric language, so for example, elements for success, we're thinking about, okay, how can we help people succeed in what they're doing? But again, I am nitpicking here, because the slides are well designed in my opinion. Next, we are on the virtual classrooms pillars of excellence. We have this beautiful triangular diagram with the dark blue, dark red, and the light turquoise. Gail, I think you know what I'm going to say on this one, and the contrast with engagement, both on the word and the icon, is the issue here, especially so particularly on the engagement piece. Now, if you are designing your slides and you're watching this video, there is a WebM contrast color contrast checker. So if you go on Google and enter contrast checkers, there are tools where you can take the color codes, such as your hex codes or RGB codes, pop them in, and from there you will be able to see, okay, this is my foreground, this is my background. Does it meet the web accessibility requirements? And you'll get that feedback on small text, larger text, and also images as well, which is a great thing.
we will pop the link in the recording
Yeah,
after.
you can absolutely do that. So moving on, I think this one was all good, and so skipping. Again, how will it benefit the learners brainstorming whiteboarding? There's a couple of things we could rephrase for clarity and inclusivity, and in a moment I will kind of do the Blue Peter style big reveal. On this slide now, we'll make it on making learning equal. Here and for a second, we're going to speak specifically kind of about hybrid experiences. Again, we have some contrast issues on the screen with the background. Now, what you have done really well here is on the screen, you've got an image and you've already put a block behind the text. But anytime there is, say, a pattern behind an image, which makes that a bit blurry, there are certain areas, particularly the lighter bits of the monitor. We have this white screen in the background, going behind the blue, but that increases or reduces the contrast between the white text we have then and the background. So I think contrast is the main thing we need to fix. There's some language and structure pieces which I have picked up and going through. There's a couple of things as well on this one, I find interesting, less an accessibility issue, but more a branding thing. You'll notice that the facilitator must font changes. Is a different font than the rest of your brand. And this is something I will come back to shortly on if we focus on the templates and look at accessibility from the start, actually, it creates a lot of quick wins later on. So if you set up a slide master, actually, when you introduce text boxes and things, then they will be in the right brand. And that's something we will come back to. Finally, simplifying language and removing jargon. So here is an area we could use bullet points for clarity. Now, a lot of people don't like bullet points or lists, but actually bullet points or lists are really good for visual flow. It also helps us to break down to key points. And again, I would simplify the language for readability. And then finally, I would simplify the language just a little bit again and look at the contrast issue. So we have the contrast issue with sync skills down at the bottom. You've got the dark blue, and I noticed elsewhere you have like a white version of the logo. So one of the things I have done is I've looked at color contrast. So I brought it up. I have evaluated the different colors you have, and then just for context, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so the WCAG guidelines, states that there are some ratio elements you need to look at. So, and as I mentioned earlier, these are for normal sized text on your screen, large text such as your fonts and headings, and so there are some best case uses. So you've got that lovely dark blue or the medium blue, or you can have the white text on your dark background. And there's color combinations that don't necessarily work, such as the light teal and red. You know, red is generally a color to avoid for a number of reasons. Now I have a summary of the combinations, which I think less specific to less relevant to our audience per se, but as you read along, you can start to see, okay, whether as you look along from what the text in the background is, does this pass, does this fail? And a good exercise actually is to take your brand guidelines and create a matrix, because by having that matrix, you can give that to a designer and they can actually see what the challenges are. Now, the reason for that is I've mentioned color blindness, and just to throw some statistics in here, as many as 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women are colorblind. So we are quite likely, say, in a training environment, if you have 36 people on a training course, to have someone who's colorblind, just as one example, might do is more than likely. So we have red blind or red weak, green blind, and blue blind. The official terms are on the screen. I'm not going to try and read them because of I tend to stutter on those. But check out Coblis. It's a colorblind simulator which I use to create these slides. So with the great thing with PowerPoint and slides is you can export them to images and you can take them then and pop them into this tool. So what I have done now is the what I would change to. So earlier we had the light blue on the no, or we had a grey, sorry, on the
Yes,
heading
it
for
was
in
the grey.
virtual and hybrid learning. I haven't gone and made that black, you know, or whatever. I've looked at the brand colours you have and go, okay, the contrast is stronger on these. So what I have done is I have kept this in with your brand, but you know, just use different colours to make that stand out a little more. As we work through, then you can see rather than the blue, I've gone for the white on black. When we come to showing that lovely pyramid, the engagements for success, I have gone. I've kept the white against the dark blue. I've kept the white against the red. But where you have a light color, I've simply flipped to black, and that's a fairly standard practice you can do, which I carry through on other slides as well. Um, in some areas, I have changed language, looking through things. In other areas, I have increased, say, the thickness or the weight of some of the the lines on the screen. Where you had that background earlier, just by actually not changing the slide, but just knocking back the transparency, it actually makes a big difference
It
to the
does,
amount you
definitely.
can read things.
Did you change the
With the
text as well?
Yes, I may well have done.
It does
So
because when you were presenting the slide, I was thinking it is very text heavy, and it's something I normally advertised against.
yes.
So it does look definitely lighter and easier
There
to
are
read.
certainly some areas where I have done, and so those of us who are exploring AI, for example, one of the great things you can do with AI tools like ChatGPT is to go, okay, can you simplify this for slide use? So you can always have the points in which you're talking about below in the notes for the speaker to add on, but can you be displaying things in a way which is more inclusive to people? So can you simplify the language against the Flesch Klein reading score? Do you know, for example, can you set the reading age to around the age of somebody who is 15 years old? Because if you can do that, you know, your chances are you're going to cater to a broader audience and maybe non-native speakers. You noticed earlier you had a slide where you'd had a screenshot, which was good, but if you were to send the slide deck out, for example, which is a good practice in accessibility, one of the things that becomes a challenge is a screen reader can't read an image of text. So in rebuilding the table, not only have I
Right.
got rid of some of the fuzziness, do you know, I have made it work if I was using a screen reader as well. And it's good practice as well just to rebuild it because I think if you were to zoom in, do you know, with an image that's only going to get more and more fuzzy. Do you know when you rebuild something, the web knows to scale that as well. There are a few areas where again you can see I have condensed the text or increased the background. Um, but generally speaking, uh, here we have down at the bottom, due to the white version of your logo, for example, the sync skills to
Yep.
increase the contrast. Um, but one of the things I wanted to note for people who use PowerPoint, I'm not sure if there is a similar version in Google Slides, but if you're using PowerPoints, one of the things that people don't know necessarily, and this doesn't just go for PowerPoint actually, it goes for Office as a whole. Office has an accessibility checker. Now, if you go to the menu, so you go on Home, then you navigate to Info, on this info slide, you'll see inspect presentation and you can check for issues. When you click on the menu, then you have three options. There is to inspect document, you can check accessibility, and you can check compatibility. Now, when you click through to check accessibility, it will then bring up a menu and it will look at the slides for you. So you can see when I opened this, there's the missing alternative text. Now, alternative text is how you would describe an image to somebody who's using a screen reader who can't otherwise see it. If you're sending these slide decks out, which is good practice for inclusivity, so people can follow along or people can zoom in if they need to, then generally speaking, I would say yes, you do need to do look at your alternative text. If you're not sending your decks out, then that's potentially less important. But anywhere where there's missing slide titles, hard to read text contrast, checking the reading order as well. You know, all these things are more important if you're sending out. Now, the reading order is if I am using a keyboard to navigate to my document, what order, and I was using the tab key to work through it, what order does it pick things up in? Do you know, and if I'm following along, that's quite important. And what you don't want is to go like page 7 and then do like in virtual and hybrid learning, the title, you don't want it jumping around. You want it to go into the flow you set as the designer. Now, I've got my contact details to briefly get in touch if you want to, but I'm not going to dwell on that, per se. I'm sure Gail will kind of pop things into the chat, but overall, you've done a fantastic job, and in most cases it was contrast more than ever, and you can kind of see the examples. But one of the things I would say is think about the words, particularly things like metaphors, idioms, or things like that. So, for example, in Britain, not that there's examples of this in this deck, but in the UK, you might say, for example, "Oh, I'm feeling under the weather today. I've got a dicky tummy." Do you know, if you're a non-native speaker, that's it won't necessarily make sense. But also, even if you have an experienced BSL sign language. When you start using colloquialisms and things like that, it's all the more and more challenging. Now, Gail, I assume that you've ran obviously through the pandemic. You might have been delivering these slides virtually. So there's beyond the design of the slides, there is the delivery of the slides, which is almost a whole different ball game. But just to cover a few tips there, I think ask the trainer to introduce yourself and who you are. If you're using a background, explain it. Maybe just because if I had full vision, I'd be able to see what's behind you, and as the audience, I would get that. And if you have an interesting picture on the wall which is serving a purpose, or if you have the background like I have, explain it just to give people that kind of context of who you are. So if I went, hi, I'm Mike Osborne, I am a white male with short dark hair, and a beard, like people in the audience, they would understand more who I am if they were kind of just listening in or on a podcast. And all these things make a small difference because if we're speaking on a panel discussion, to know that your panel isn't all senior white men, if you've made the effort to go through like a diverse panel, makes a difference. Also, the speed in which we speak makes a difference. And particularly if you're using tools like Zoom now has live captions to those are live captions make mistakes, yes, they do. And I know sometimes they get a bad rep, but they're almost better than not having them, in my opinion. And the slower we speak and the more we articulate, the better it is to get our points across.
Well, I've got a lot to say about live caption when you've got a foreign accent, but let's not dwell into this. Thank you very much, Michael. This is great. Would you actually have noticed that in the appraisal that you've done of ThinkScale slide, you said that contrast was probably visually and in terms of design the biggest challenge. Is it something common to other typical tech
Yes.
slides that you, and what are the other main things to look out when we design for
Sure.
inclusion?
So back in 2020, I was selected to be one of the UK's first 30 under 30 at the Learning Technologies. And the great thing about the Learning Technologies is you have the conference and you have the exhibition floor. Now, when I walk along the exhibition floor, obviously it's full of people trying to sell their wares for good reason. They've worked hard on it and we all need to make a profit, right? But time and time again, I'm seeing the same issues. And generally speaking, there will be poor contrast, there will be small font sizes, quite often in webinars. And quite often, the reason for this is because, hey, we've got to work with these strict brand guidelines. So quite often the brand marketers are a problem, but we also need to be pushing back. So I find brand marketers, they design slides to be delivered in a sales format. Me speaking to you
Yeah.
over a webinar like this, not in a classroom setting where people are at the back of the room. Now, going beyond that, if there is video, do you have the closed captions on, for example? Now, the caveat on that is closed captions don't help everyone and they can be a distractor. For example, if you have dyslexia, some other cognitive disabilities, they can actually be distracting. But in a conference setting, in particular, where you're trying to demonstrate something, to have the captions on in that noisy environment, people can hear. But also, I might be a parent. I have a 1-year-old at home, and certainly, if he's a light sleeper, sometimes I don't want the TV blaring in the background, or if I'm on a webinar, or maybe. Your partner works at home and might be taking a call opposite you. So sometimes those captions can be helpful, not to miss things. So captions is certainly another one. And when it comes to online learning as well, particularly documents, it's making sure things are designed to work with a screen reader as well. So making sure your images have alternative text and making sure that you can tab through the document using your tab key and work through a keyboard without necessarily having a mouse. Those are some of the key and most common issues, and those general points will apply whether it's your website or whatever, through to your learning. And So again, you might look at if you're going into e-learning as well, you start to get on forms, but let's not get onto that now because we've evaluated a presentation today, and e-learning accessibility could be a different thing in its own right. But yeah, it's definitely not just your company. I see it across the industries, and that's actually why I founded Accessible Me. I had the opportunity to apply to another to other roles doing accessibility, but I found it accessible me to work with companies to make their content more inclusive. And I figure every time I speak at conferences like the Learning Technologies, which I will be again in the autumn, which I'm excited to be speaking, if I have 100 people on the call and just 10 go away and make two changes, the actual reach is potentially big, and that's why I do this. I'm not out to make millions. I'm out to help millions, and that's really my goal.
That is a wonderful say. And for me, it's definitely the readers that we need to take away and probably focus a little bit more. I guess we are all users of slides, especially in the
Yes.
learning world. We create them, we look at them, we go to webinars and presentation. So I guess awareness on that element is probably easier than it is the reader element, the automated reader element is
Yes.
definitely something we can overlook. And also, we all intend to make last minute changes in our
Yeah.
presentations, in our slide, and then bang, we PDF them and send them. It is those little things that actually become an issues because the processes are not in place to double check before we send, and that it's not, and that's why this series is happening. It is not just about how to do it, but it's about the processes when we design to make sure that this very last change is not going to affect the learners with accessibility issues because everything all of a sudden is all over the place and the readers will not work or this element. So that is very insightful. Thank you very much for your time, Michael. We are going to add, so we talked about Coblis and we talked about, what is the other tool you mentioned earlier on?
There's the WebAIM tool, the colorblind checker, and there's a couple of other resources which I can give, and we'll put those in the chat rather than talk them through.
Absolutely. They will be posted underneath the video. And I've got one last thing, because we are all in the business of performance in learning. So we want people to learn faster. We want people to learn quicker because they need to save time, especially in the corporate world. We are more and more about less time and doing more. So my questions, and I think as this is the first session, I should probably go first. If there is one thing that we would like to learn faster, quicker, what would it be? And I think it's fair enough that I start. For me, it's singing. It is something that I've been struggling with my whole life, and I would love to discover a system that allow me maybe 5 minutes a day, like you do. Some people do
Yeah.
Duolingo to sing better by Christmas, so I can bowl the Christmas carols in a nicer way. Interestingly, as you can hear, my accent hasn't changed. So there is also here something that my here the relations doesn't necessarily work quite well. So it's a lot harder for me to reproduce sound. So anyway, Michael, what would it be for you?
Sure. So my dad is a very good musician. He's a guitarist. If you go on YouTube and search Lewis Osborne, you'll find a couple of his videos. And I'm proud to say that he's the guitarist in the West End musical Moulin Rouge at the moment. Now, growing up as a little boy, I certainly was inspired by my dad, and I wanted to pick up the guitar. But I think a bit of a fixed mindset. I always waited for him to be home and teach me. And now I'm not saying my dad was never around, but when he was around, he'd like to engage in kind of taking the family out as well, and things like that. So we weren't we didn't really have the time to kind of sit down and play and teach me. Now my brother was very much a natural at music, so when he picked up the drums and could almost just do it, I went on to the things like maths and all those things I'm good at. So for me, it'd definitely be if I could pick up a guitar and play it. I have one of my favorite of my dad's guitars up in my room that I've had probably for about 10, 12 years now. Um, kind of I say gathering dust in the politest way. Um, I would love to be able to pick up and play that, doing rock out to kind of Metallica, maybe Jimi Hendrix, and a few things like that. Now,
Awesome.
I'm probably going to start lighter with like Twinkle Little Star and stuff, but yeah,
Maybe
definitely the
maybe
guitar.
our target would be to have a duet by the end of the year. Watchers, watch out. But yes, something to think about and to probably enjoy. Well, Michael, thank you so much. You've been the first
Always a
guest
pleasure.
of Learning Horizons. Accessibility is everything we breathe in learning. So it's definitely was a key topic to be addressed first. And thank you for your time. And watch this space. We're going to have a lot more topics coming up very soon. Thank you, Michael. And
Watch your
thank you,
space and all
everybody,
the
for
best.
watching.